Hello, Bobs. We're back with the sequel to Cruel as a Grave. This is Tried for Her Life. I was going to read this copy of Tried for Her Life since it's the sister companion from the Hearst Company editions, but can't really see Hearst there, but let's see. Can focus? No. There it is. Since it's a sister companion, I was going to read it, but as you can see, the book's falling apart. Text is kind of ugly. So I'm going with this more dainty version of it. Tried for Her Life. This is a Grosset and Dunlap edition, likely from the same period in the early 1900s. Now that this preamble's done, I will also show this. Miss Marion Reichman, it looks like. A name which I will look into, just because I'm interested in antique titles and their previous owners. Let's go on with this. As you can see, Grosset and Dunlap. Sybil's, Chapter 1 will be Sybil's Subterranean Adventures. I don't know if you have read the first book, but if you have, you probably should stop listening. Or if you haven't, you probably should stop listening right now, because Sybil was taken while on the lam with her husband, Mr. Berners. I can't think of his name right now. Lion Berners. They were on the lam and being pursued by I'm not sure if it was the marshal or whoever it was, sheriff. And they had escaped him one time with the aid of the second in charge and the police escort. And they escaped and they went back to the haunted chapel where they had spent a night on the lam after they first left the what do you call it? The compound? The estate. And the Sybil was apparently taken by ghosts to the underground tomb at the climax of Cruel as a Grave. Anyways, let's start. Tried for Her Life, Chapter 1. Sybil's Subterranean Adventures. Dark den is this, witch-haunted, devil-built, and filled with horrid shapes, but not of men or beasts, or aught with which the affrighted sense hath ever made acquaintance. When Sybil recovered from her death-like swoon, she felt herself being borne slowly on through what seemed a narrow, tortuous underground passage, but the utter darkness, relieved only by a little gleaming red taper that moved like a star before her, preventing her from seeing more. A presentiment of impending destruction possessed her, and overwhelming horror filled her soul and held her faculties. Though her life had depended upon her speech, she could not have uttered a syllable, and no word was breathed by the mysterious beings who bore her on. Dumb as mutes at a funeral, they marched, silent, breathless, as one on the brink of death. Sybil held her senses fast and prayed, and the little red spark moved through the darkness before her, like a malignant star leading her to doom. By the way, I don't believe they're ghosts, but human helpers. We'll find out, though. And I don't read these books in advance, so I am just as surprised as the reader who has unluckily happened upon this bumbling reading. And how long drawn out the dreadful way. Minutes seemed months, and hours ages. They walk for hours? I'll shut up now. The awful forms that held her in their hands, their monotonous tread as they bore her on, their utter silence, the deep darkness, the damp, earthy, stifling atmosphere, the agony of suspense, the horror of anticipation, all these must have sent her into another swoon. But that her vigilant mind still held her senses alert, and she prayed. Who were these beings? Why had they abducted her? What would they do with her? She asked herself these questions, but shrank appalled from any possible answer. Death? Dishonor worse than death? Oh, that some miracle might save her in this tremendous peril, she prayed. And what a tedious anguish of anxiety. When would the end come? At length, a breath of fresh air, as from the upper world, was wafted past her face. Welcome as a drop of cold water to a parched palate was this breath of fresh air to her fevered lungs. But it passed, and all was close and suffocating again. Next, a faint gleam of pale light glanced through the darkness far ahead, but it vanished, and all was blackness again, but for the little red spark moving before her, all silent, suffocating, dark. But presently there came another breath of air, together with a faint, fair blue light as of day in the far distance, and soon the breath of air became a breeze, and Sybil drew in refreshing draughts that, in renewing her vitality, almost restored her courage. And now they moved on faster, for the path was freer, and now also the drawing light enabled Sybil to see her captors, and if any circumstance could have increased her horror, the looks of these men must have done so. They were of almost gigantic height, and shrouded from head to foot in long black gowns with hoods that were drawn over their heads, while their faces were entirely concealed by black masks. A shudder ran through her frame as she looked upon them. But soon the changing aspect of the subterranean passage forced itself upon her attention. It now seemed that so much a narrow passage is a succession of small caverns, one opening into another, and every advanced one rather larger, lighter, and more beautiful than the preceding, the walls, floor, and ceiling being of bright red sandstone and lighted here and there with sparkling stalactites. At last, through a narrower and more tortuous winding than any they had yet passed, they suddenly entered a spacious cavern of such exceeding beauty and splendor that for an instant Sybil lost sight of her terrors in her astonishment and admiration. The walls and roofs of this dazzling place were completely covered with the purest pearl-like spar, and lighted with pendant crystals and stalactites, that as they caught the stray sunbeams glowed, burned, blazed, and sparkled like a million of pendant diamonds, rubies, emeralds, and sapphires. The floor was thickly carpeted with living moss of the most brilliant hues of vivid green, soft gray, delicate rose, and cerulean blue. Into this enchanting palace of nature the light entered from many almost imperceptible crevices. All this Sybil saw at a glance, and then her eyes settled upon a figure who seemed the sole occupant of the place. This was a young girl, who, with her red cloak thrown mat-like on the moss, was seated upon it cross-legged in the Turkish fashion. Her elfin face, her malign eyes, her wild black hair, and picturesque costume were all so in keeping with the aspect of the place, that one might have deemed her the spirit of the cavern. Sybil had scarcely time to observe all this before her bearer stood her immediately in front of the seated girl, and saying, "There she is, princess. So work your will upon her." They withdrew. Now the worst of Sybil's terrors were over. Those dreadful men were gone. Before her was only a woman, a girl, whom she certainly had no reason to fear. They looked at each other in silence for perhaps half a minute, and then Sybil spoke. "What place is this? Who are you? Why am I brought hither?" "One question at a time," answered the girl. "What place this is concerns you little. Who I am concerns you less. Why you are brought here, that concerns you very much. It concerns your liberty, and perhaps your life. I do not believe it. You have had me torn away from my husband. Where is he now?" haughtily demanded Mrs. Berners. "He is likely in the hands of the constables, who are by this time in possession of the haunted chapel. But fear nothing. Him they will release again, for they have no right to detain him. But you they would have kept, if they had caught you. Come, lady, do not resent the rough manner in which you were saved. I do not understand all this. It is scarcely necessary that you should. And my husband, when shall I see him? When you can do so with safety to yourself and to us." "When will that be?" "How can I tell?" "Oh, heaven, he will be half crazed with anxiety. Better that he should be half crazed with anxiety than wholly crazed by despair." "Lady, had we not removed you when we did, you would certainly be in the hands of the constables before this day is over. Probably before this hour. How do you know this? From information brought in by our spies. We came upon the haunted chapel by chance in the dead of night. No one could have known so soon that we were there. No one did know it. 2 constables were coming there for us, but they would have found you had we not brought you away with us. That was my doing. I made your removal the condition of my silence. Girl, who are you? I ask again, and why do you take this interest in me? Lady, I am an outlaw like yourself, hunted like yourself, in peril like yourself, guiltless like yourself, the daughter, sister, companion of thieves. Yet never will I become a thief, or the wife, or the mother of one. This is terrible, said Sybil with a shudder, but why should this be so? It is my fate. And why do you care for me? I thought I had answered that question in telling you all that I have told about myself, for a fellow feeling makes us wondrous kind. But if you want another reason, I can give it to you. I care for you because I know that you are guiltless of the crime for which you are hunted through the world, and I am resolved, come what may, that you shall not suffer for it. In the name of heaven, what do you say? Exclaimed Sybil in strong excitement. If you know me to be guiltless, you must know who is guilty. Nay, you do know it. You cannot only save my life, but clear my fame. Hush, I know nothing, but that you are guiltless. I can do nothing but save your life. You took me away in the absence of my husband. Why could you not have waited a little while until his return? And, ha, laughed the girl, breaking in upon Sybil's speech. Waited until his return and take 2 strangers, himself and his servant, into our confidence? Moloch would have brained me, or Belial would have poisoned me if I had done such a thing. We are knaves, but not fools, Mrs. Berners. But when will you communicate with him to relieve his dreadful suspense? As soon as it shall be safe to do so. Our first care must be our own safety, but our second will be yours. Sybil said no more at the moment, but sat looking at the speaker and thinking of all that had befallen her in the haunted chapel. Could this bright, warm-spirited creature possibly be the damp girl whose 2 nightly visitations had appalled her so much? She put the question. Tell me, are you the one who came twice to my bedside and lay down beside me, or is there another? Her strange hostess laughed aloud and clapped her hands, and there immediately appeared before them, as if it had dropped from the sky or risen out of the earth, a figure that caused Sybil to start and utter a half-suppressed scream. It was that of a small, thin girl, so bloodless that her complexion was bluish-white. Her hair and eyes were also very light, and her dress was a faded-out blue calico that clung close to her form. Her whole aspect was cold, damp, clammy, corpse-like, as she stood mutely with hanging hands before her summoner. For heaven's sake, who is she? Inquired Sybil under her breath. We call her Proserpine, because she was reft from the upper world and brought down here. She is my maid, my shadow, my wraith, my anything you like that never leaves me. She it was who visited you in idleness or curiosity, I suppose. She bore the taper before you when you came through the underground passage. More than this I cannot tell you of her, since more I do not know myself. You may go now, Proserpine. See, I looked it up. I actually cared this time. And tell old Hecate, oh no, I should look that up too, to hurry up the breakfast, as we have company this morning. Now I have to go look up Hecate. It's actually Hecate. And tell old Hecate to hurry up the breakfast, as we have company this morning. And do you come and let me know when it is ready. Sybil kept her eyes on the pallid girl to see where she would go, and she saw her slip through an almost invisible opening in the side of the rock. Then Sybil turned again to her strange entertainer and said, There is something more I wish to know, if you do not mind telling me. Why were we drugged with opium that night? Ha ha ha! We had some goods to remove from the vault. You were all in our way. We were obliged either to kill you or to drug you. So we drugged you, laughed the girl, and nearly killed us as well. Yes, we had to make sure of your taking enough to put you to sleep, so I poured the laudanum into your coffee pot pretty freely, I tell you. At this moment the bloodless phantom appeared again, and in the same thin, reed-like voice that sounded so far away, she announced that breakfast was ready. "Come then, I know you must need nourishment," said Sybil's wild hostess, rising to lead the way. And now Sybil saw how it was that the pale girl had slipped through the almost invisible aperture like a spirit vanishing through a solid wall. For the rocky partitions of this natural underground palace overlapped each other, leaving a passage of about 1 foot in width and 3 feet in length between the walls. Through this they passed into a smaller cavern, which, like the larger one, had its roof and walls encrusted with pearly sparks and hung with sparkling stalactites, and its floor covered with living moss. This cavern was not only beautiful but comfortable. A large charcoal furnace that stood in the middle of the floor agreeably warmed the place, while the appetizing odor of hot coffee, broiled birds, and buckwheat cakes filled the air. But the furniture of the place was the most incongruous and amazing that could be imagined. A wooden table of the rudest workmanship stood near the furnace, but it was covered with a white damask tablecloth of the finest description, and adorned with the service of the purest silver plate. With this elegant and costly array was intermingled crockeryware of the coarsest pattern. Around the table were placed 2 three-legged stools of the roughest manufacture, and 1 piano chair of the most finished workmanship of carved rosewood and cut velvet. Waiting on this table stood the damp girl mentioned before, and also a very small, dark, withered old woman in a black gown, with a red handkerchief tied over her head and under her chin. "Come, Mrs. Berners, you are my guest, and I will give you the seat of honor," said Sybil's nameless hostess, as she led her to the little piano chair and put her on it. Then for herself she took one of the 3-legged stools, saying to her handmaid, "You may take the other 2 seats away. Moloch and Belial will not be at breakfast with us this morning. They have gone back to the vault to lay the train." "Dangerous," muttered the old woman between her shut lips. "Never you mind, Mother Hecate. Moloch's courage and Belial's craft will enable them to take care of themselves," said the girl, as she set a cup of hot coffee before her guest and placed a broiled partridge and a buckwheat cake upon her plate. Sybil's long ride of the night before, followed as it had been by a refreshing sleep, had so restored her strength and appetite that, despite her late fright and her present anxieties, she made a very good breakfast. "And now," said the young hostess as they arose from the table, "what will you do? Will you lie down on my bed in the next cavern and sleep? Or will you sit here where it is warm and talk? Or will you let me show you through this network of caverns that underlies all of this mountain? You are very kind at all events, and I thank you much, and I think I would like to look at this great natural curiosity, whose very existence so near my home I never even suspected," said Sybil. For she really wished to explore the wonderful labyrinth, not only from motives of curiosity, but also of policy, for she thought it would be well to know the ins and outs of this underground habitation, in case she should find it necessary to make her escape. So her hostess took her back into the splendid outer cavern, saying, "You do not wish to go back through any of those caverns you passed in coming here, so we will go this way." As she passed behind another of those overlapping partitions of rock and led Sybil into another small division, fitted up as a rude but clean bedchamber. In one corner was a pile of dried moss and leaves, covered with fine white linen sheets and soft, warm woolen blankets. On a ledge of rock stood a tin wash basin, in which stood a pure silver ewer. In a word, the appointments of this apartment were as incongruous as those of the other had been found. "This is my bed, and if you should be tired when we get back from our tour through the caverns, or at any time, you can lie down here and sleep in perfect safety," said the girl. "I thank you," answered Sybil as they passed out of that division into another. It was as the girl had told her, a network or cellwork of caverns, occupying, as far as it had been explored, several acres under the mountain. All these caverns bore a natural resemblance to each other. All had their roofs and walls encrusted with pearly spars and hung with glittering stalactites, and their floors covered with living moss, and all were connected by narrow passages, with the walls lapping past each other. But some of these caverns were large and lighted by crevices in the roof, and others were small and dark. Some of the passages between them were also wide and free, and some narrow and impassable, and in some black, inaccessible holes was heard the fearful sound of subterranean waters. In one of the larger divisions of the cavern there were boxes and bales of merchandise, and silver plate and jewels. In another there was the complicated machinery of an underground distillery. And in still another was a collection of burglars' tools, counterfeiters' instruments, and firearms. I show you all. I do not fear to do so. You will never betray us, even if you have a chance. But you will never have a chance, said the guide. What? You would not keep me here forever? No, for we shall not stay forever. Be comforted, lady. No harm is intended you, said the girl, as having shown her guest all that was to be seen of the caverns, she conducted her back to the bedroom. I am very much surprised at all that I have seen, said Sybil. I had no idea that there was a cave of such extent and beauty so near our home. I believe, answered the girl, that there are many caves in the mountains, as there are many isles in the ocean that have never been discovered. Sybil looked up in surprise. You call yourself the companion of thieves, yet you talk like a person of intelligence and refinement, she said. The girl laughed sardonically. Of course, people of intelligence and refinement are all and always honest and true. You should know Belial. He taught me to read. I taught myself everything else. I have read Homer, Dante, Milton, and Shakespeare. But now you are tired. You look so. Lie down on my bed of moss and rest, and I will cover you up warm. Thank you. I will do so, answered Sybil, gladly stretching her wearied limbs upon the soft couch. Her wild hostess covered her carefully, and then left her, saying, Sleep in peace, lady, for here you are perfectly safe. Ooh. Well, that was unexpected, but there we are, brobs. Goodbye. Goodbye. Goodbye.